We can start helping tenant farmers specifically. All of these private organizations that are stepping forward now that all these federal programs are just poof, they're gone. Whatever floats your boat. Different strokes for different folks. It's every field and farmer is different. In-field practices make your soil so much more resilient. I think 10 years from now, Iowa's going to be the standard, the gold standard for how to get these locally led private lands conservation initiatives off the ground.
Welcome back to the water table for our fourth part of the conversation with Ruth McCabe. You know, I asked you before you came in just a little bit because Heartland Co-op is really, in regards to what's happening with conservation and agriculture, you guys are always on the forefront of that, which is exciting, and thank you for that. But so what's new in the world of Heartland Co-op when it comes to conservation agriculture?
Great question. We've got a lot going on. My team is expanding. I think I talked about this the last time I was on, and that still stands. I'm going to be hiring more conservation agronomists, which is a good problem to have. This last winter, we launched our sustainability-linked loan with CoBank. So not a lot of people know who CoBank is, because CoBank is more of a third-tier lender to agricultural institutions like ag-retailers like Heartland. So they are the ones who loan us money. And we launched a sustainability-linked loan with them, where what we do is we go after certain key performance indicators, metrics that we've chosen ahead of time, like cover crops, outlets treated with saturated buffers, those kinds of things. And if we hit those goals, then they reduce our company's interest on our operating loan. Now, the beauty of this is that now we have this stream of income that we've already technically paid. It's like forcing us to save money because we get that money back, but it's basically forcing us to save that money. And we are going to be using that money to invest in a small endowment fund that we will be creating the Heartland Conservation Fund that will be creating a nonprofit to support so that we can start helping tenant farmers specifically. That's the idea here, is to really assist tenant farmers with those short-term costs to adopt in-field conservation practices, or to help a landowner with maybe an expense associated with a wetland or something that they didn't anticipate. So it's not going to be a massive endowment fund. We're not talking like the Walton Foundation or something. We're not going to have that kind of capital, but we are going to be using this money to help fund small conservation projects, local regional projects in Iowa, and specifically aiming it towards assisting tenant farmers, with adopting practices and landowners adopting things like edge of field practices. So we're excited about that fund. It hasn't launched yet, but I'm allowed to talk about it now. I wasn't allowed to talk about it up to 2 weeks ago, but we are definitely the first retailer to try something like this. And so it is very weird. Your girl does not know how to make a nonprofit, but I am learning along with everybody else on my team. And so we're excited about being able to launch it and do some fundraising for it. And we'll be using a lot of the money that comes from our sustainability-linked loan then. So my team has to continue to hustle to hit those KPIs, right? And then we're going to use that money to seed it, basically, and serve as match for when we go out and fundraise. So.
What does fundraising for that look like?
Oh man, I don't know. Okay. I'm learning as I go. Okay. I told you I'm learning as I go. We'll probably be going around and asking organizations who want to partner with boots on the ground. We are boots on the ground, right? With boots on the ground teams like my own. We're going to be asking if we can put so much forward to match. Will you match that? And probably be basing it around physical installation of practices. So there'll be sort of maybe an agreement where we say, look, we'll put $20,000 towards this if you can put $20,000 towards this, and our goal will be another 30 outlets treated with saturated buffers or whatever. I'm shooting from the hip, as you said, with those numbers, but some sort of partnership, which to be fair, that is how my team is funded right now, right? My team is funded through partnerships where we get practices in the ground and then you pay us for those practices. We're just like a sales agronomist. It's just we're not selling bags and jugs. We're selling physical in-the-ground practices. Only now we're going to be asking partners, potentially, if they want, to kick money into this endowment fund instead, right? So that we have this continual source of funding. Because, let's be clear, and we don't have to verge too far into this, but with everything that's happening, say, at the federal level with conservation funding, there have been a lot of projects here in the last month that have disappeared into the ether, where people were getting funding and now they're not. And this is where my inner conservative comes out too, because I want to see states have a greater ability to leverage money internally to support conservation, conservation agriculture. Maybe it won't be quite as lucrative as what you could get from a federal conservation contract, whatever that looks like from the NRCS or whatever. But I'd like to see states be able to do something with state-raised money to support conservation transition in their states. And I feel like what Heartland is doing is one avenue, but Batch and Build is another avenue. But there's all of these private organizations that are stepping forward now that all these federal programs like the Climate Smart Commodities projects and anything under the Inflation Reduction Act have just whoosh, poof, they're gone. There's a lot of private companies we're seeing step forward and they're going, okay, now's the time. Like we can step into this space. Let's step into this space and come up with something comparable. For example, here's an example. I would love to see an alternative to CRP in like Iowa, for example. With the saturated buffers that I'm putting in, a lot of the landowners who participate in the program, they'll do it, but only if they can also enroll that filter strip above ground in CRP. Well, CRP is not open, and it hasn't been for a while, right? At least not in our neck of the woods. Yeah. And so it's like, I don't want those landers. It's like I don't want to say to them, well, we can't enroll this filter strip in CRP, so you're not going to do the program. I want to be able to say to them, okay, how about this alternative? Right. I've raised a little bit of money. It's not quite as much as what you'd get from a 10-year contract, but it's close. How about we pay you this instead? You sign a simple maintenance agreement that gets housed with your local conservation district, and that's an alternative to CRP. Right. Now you don't have to go to the local office. You don't have to deal with any federal contracts. That's actually really attractive to a lot of landowners. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Different strokes for different folks. Yeah. So that's kind of a granular example of that's what I want to see come out of all of this federal upheaval. Whoosh. Okay, I'm done now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And if you can find a place, farmers and landowners are, I don't want to use the word trained, but they know and they have the ability to find these programs, and they should. You know, if they're not gonna farm that land and not gonna get that income off from there, then they're looking for other ways to do that. And it makes a lot of sense if that's not open. And CRP has been hard to do a lot of because of the Farm Bill and they're not lack thereof a Farm Bill. And so then it's open and it's closed and it's open and it's closed. And so if you can do that more on the local level,
absolutely,
it makes some sense.
Yeah, funding locally where there's faces and there's people that are familiar with the organizations that are funding it. I think it just builds a network and a community that's more invested in the program too. I mean, our Batch and Build, for example, that we hold winter banquets for all the people who participate in our Batch and Builds, and you should see these things. I mean, oh man, it's a whole thing. It's a circus, and it's so exciting, and everybody's really excited. And they get to know each other, neighbors shaking hands. Oh, you participated in the program? I had no idea. It's a whole movement and energy, and the cool thing is it's all locally led, right? It's neighbors talking to neighbors, or it's us going out and knocking on doors, and then the next thing you know, at the winter banquet, people are talking about how excited they are to go out and see the water moving through their drainage control structures. And I know it sounds really nerdy, but they get really excited about it. And then I get excited because I'm like, yes, you should be excited.
Well,
clean water.
Yeah, but they do because they can't see it until then.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's when they can see it. Same thing with wetlands. And, I mean, I think people look at it and say, man, we're putting in so much work and time and effort and money, and then when we can't see it, that's why it's easier to buy a nice tractor than to
absolutely,
because you can be proud of it. And but once it's done and there's either an outlet or that buffer strip or a wetland, which a lot of I've been around a long time and I've heard it almost all the time is farmers aren't against conservation.
Nope.
And a lot of times if there's the right place on a great 80 or quarter, they want to leave that for water quality, for the wildlife, whatever it might be. And
by far the biggest advocates for our edge of field programs are tenant farmers that have come to us, as I said earlier, and said, I want you to talk to my landowner about this. And so they are by far our biggest recruiters for us.
So another thing we talked about before we went on air was just kind of weather patterns and what's happening. And a lot of that connects to conservation too, right? I mean, what we're really talking about is here we are, spring of 2025. It's dry in Iowa. You drove through some really wet areas of Minnesota, but it's dry here too. And we've been seeing this more where we're getting the same amount of rain in a year. We're getting it all within a certain period of time. Yeah. And for obvious reasons, conservation practices are even more important
Absolutely.
when you're seeing those kind of things, both from the standpoint of drought resistance and from when it rains too much and having erosion and things like that. So anything to add to that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I could go, again, there's so many things to say about this subject. I'll start with the fact that we talked about, you and I were talking about this before we started recording, but there's a movement in the insurance industry to start, like housing insurance, for example, to start charging higher deductibles, for example, for certain events in different parts of the country, like in Nebraska and Iowa. And I speak personally because I just got this letter yesterday from my insurance company telling me that they're raising my deductible in the event of hail or wind damage because these events have become they're not as necessarily common, but they are far more severe when they do happen in Iowa. That now the insurance company is like, we're losing too much money on this, so we're raising deductibles on this particular instance. And in Florida, with flooding, good luck getting flood insurance, or in California, good luck finding housing insurance that's going to give you fire protection. So I think the writing is on the wall there. Regardless of how you feel about quote unquote climate change, we can acknowledge that there are weather events that are becoming more severe when they happen. And one of the things I love about conservation practices, in-field practices, make your soil so much more resilient to when these intense storms happen. And the idea here is resiliency. Again, I don't think about in-field practices as something that's just going to magically raise your yield and it's going to be amazing for your operation. And long-term, they usually practices in the long term wind up making a farm more profitable. A lot of times that's because they make the fields more resilient in extreme weather conditions. Great example is those farmers I told you about. 2019, they were able to plant because they had cover crop out there that was soaking up all that excess moisture. In a year like that, that's a flippin' game changer, right? And so you can make money back hand over fist in those kinds of years. It makes your fields more resilient. Edge of field practices, those filter strips and buffer strips. In a severe year where you've got some crazy storm washing over your soil surface, that would remove gobs of soil from your field, you now have a filter strip to capture all that, right? It just catches it at the edge and holds it there, slows it down. Same thing if you're using extreme min-till or reduced till. You're just holding that soil where it would have washed away before. And then saturated buffers. In Iowa, we can still put our anhydrous down in the fall. I know there's a lot of changes in Minnesota that depending on where you farm, that's not an option. But we get these gushers in the late fall when our soil isn't frozen yet, and or you're losing all that nitrogen that you put down. I mean, without getting into the talks about economics, like your saturated buffer, your bioreactor is capturing a lot of that would otherwise be lost to the stream. So again, it just makes our fields more resilient, makes the agricultural system more resilient, while still providing some ecosystem services back to the environment. And so that's, extreme weather events, I think that's just a reality for us. And moving forward, this is where I see conservation being a real, again, MVP, in that conservation practices can make it so that we can continue to produce productively, even in an extreme year.
Yeah, and I think what we're finding, and it's great to have you on and continue to have you on for these reasons, is that I think some of the reasons why things are the way they are is we haven't changed for so long, and so you keep doing these highly productive ways of doing things, and after a while, the soil can't take it, or the water quality can't take it, or whatever. So in order to improve that, there is not one silver bullet. There never will be, but there's probably not 5. There's probably 25, 30 things that you can do, and you need to do a bunch of them in order to. Yeah,
and everybody's going to be different, and everybody.
And has to be.
And has to be, absolutely.
There's topography issues. There's.
Soil issues. I mean, yes. Yeah, there's. Again, I keep saying this, whatever floats your boat. Different strokes for different folks. It's every field and farmer is different. And I know that that's a cliche that, again, I get some pushback from like environmentalist groups on that. But it's well, clearly you don't work in agriculture, because if you did, you would agree with that statement completely, because you can walk out and there can be a road separating two fields that have wildly different soil types. It's got to come down to the management system. It's got to come down to the landowner. It's got to come down to the tenure on that land. There's so much that the decision to use or not use a certain practice comes down to. And my only goal is to get everybody who touches farmland in some capacity to think, okay, but what could work on this field? Let's try it, because something is better than nothing. So. Yeah,
and if you want to get really technical, we've seen in the water management side where water moves underground.
Oh, yeah.
And so some fields are really wet because it's just the way the veins of the earth and the soil are, that water moves from one area to another area, and it can move miles. And so people think, well, why is that field always so wet? Well, there's reasons we can't explain at times.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely, yeah. So
good. Well, what as far as what are you most excited about that you guys have? Maybe you've already mentioned it, but that you're working on, that you see as a something that it's starting now, but maybe 2-3 years from now it's going to be a big deal for you. I'm excited about.
I'll start at the micro level and move to the macro level, but within Heartland, I'm excited about our move into creating this, like I mentioned, this endowment fund, because I feel like we've had some projects that have had to be sidelined or just put on the back burner for lack of funding in a small way. And so I really see our endowment fund as a way for us to give back to our local farming communities, to make those projects happen, if in the absence of other cost share programs that would support them. So I'm excited about that, and we're moving in a way. It's very bleeding edge, and it's always exciting to be at the bleeding edge. So excited about that at the micro level, and also my company's just expansion into doing more saturated buffers and bioreactors, also expanding our skill set into helping people do more precision conservation. Just exciting that we're moving in those directions. So we're just constantly cutting new swaths, and that's exciting. Now to move outward and away from Heartland, it is very exciting for me to see in Iowa, as it is right now, all of these private companies coming together with nonprofits and with state, with like the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, partnering in the most innovative and unique ways and coming up with solutions to things like the CRP problem I mentioned to you, coming up with solutions to that where I'm like, excellent alternative opportunity. This is fan-flippin-tastic. If there's a vacuum, fill it with something that's even better at the local level. And I'm seeing that with saturated buffers, bioreactors, buffer strips. There's a couple counties that are piloting what we call buffer batch and builds. So not putting in saturated buffers and bioreactors, just going after fields that could use a buffer or a filter strip, right? And building it the same way in this batch and build model, and going after landowners next to each other for miles on end. Super exciting. And they've developed a sort of CRP-esque payment scheme around it. And it's just super unique and novel. And so there's 2 counties in Iowa that are going to be piloting that this year. Dubuque County is one of them. So proud of Dubuque. But there's another county that hasn't got it off the ground yet, so I won't name them, but it's in central Iowa. And so those kinds of local initiatives, from my perspective, it's like, first of all, I get envious because I'm like, that's a good idea, and I wish I'd thought of it. Yeah. But I'm also like, yeah, this is great. Keep it up. Let's just blow them all out of the water and make everybody at the national level, like 5 to 10 years from now, be like, where the heck did Iowa come out of the rear? And they're just owning conservation agriculture. I admit that I'm a little bloodthirsty in that way, and that all I want to do is dominate in the conservation space. So I'm excited because I really think we're going to get there. Like, I think 10 years from now, Iowa's going to be the standard, the gold standard for how to get these locally led private lands conservation initiatives off the ground. And then that brings me to a more national level. What's happening in Iowa, but with national, like, for example, there's a couple of federal agencies. I won't name them because I don't know if I have permission to name that they do this work, but there's a couple federal agencies that we work with who are helping us do wetland work and oxbow restoration work, and in an innovative, unique, cool way where they're providing a lot of the oversight and the auditings to make sure that everything's being done on the up and up, but they're also stepping away and letting these local partners lead the effort to do the oxbow restorations or the wetland work. They're helping in all the ways that a federal agency should help, and then getting out of the way when the local partners need to come together and solve a problem. And it has been so cool to see that happen too. So again, I think a decade from now, Iowa is going to be the gold standard for conservation. Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I don't disagree at all, but I hadn't really ever thought of it this way. But when Iowa outpaces everyone else, which they already are, but when it just becomes so obvious, it's also somewhat surprising because it is the number 1 production state too. Yep. And so there probably is more tension than I realized there, but there's a ton. That it feels like there isn't, right? Because you're doing so much of it, but yet there's the tension of that. And so I think there's probably a story in there and an opportunity in there for some of the rest of us that don't live in Iowa, and how we tell that story and how we get other states to start down the same path. I want other states to believe they can do it. I've gone to like the Delmarva which is that's out in the Chesapeake Bay, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. So I've given presentations in the Delmarva Peninsula to different like soil conservation groups and conservation districts. And afterward, I've just had people come up and be like, I just have a hard time believing this. And I'm like, it's real. Trust me. I have a whole job and an income that comes from this. So I wouldn't exist if this wasn't real. But I want other places to believe who have this sort of downtrodden attitude of, well, this can't be done. And it's like, again, horse hockey. It can be done. We're doing it in Iowa, of all places. Anybody can get these locally led initiatives off the ground. So that's my goal, is to get everybody else to think, well, heck, if Iowa can do it,
well, and
we can do it.
It's the age-old thing of places like Minnesota that think, that want to lead the conservation thing, but stop every possible thing you say. Then you go nowhere, and and good for Iowa. And at some point they're going to have to take a look and say, what do we do? Yeah, well, which was nothing.
I will. Yeah, right. I will. That thought, I mentioned federal agencies that are helping. There are also some, four-letter federal agencies in the conservation space that I think are not helping and have slowed things down in a way that it's like, you said no because you had the power to say no.
Yeah, and they literally are four-letter agencies. You weren't just saying that.
Yeah, no, they are literally four-letter agencies that I really do. I could grind that axe ad nauseum. So, there's a lot of changes happening federally, and so I hope that some of the changes that are happening will clear up some of those issues. I don't know that they will, but whatever. You got to do something. And so from my perspective, I want to just shove those who like to just say no because they can out of the way. And if there's other federal agencies who are saying, well, hey, we'll help you. We'll step up and help you out. I'm all about it. Game on. As long as your goal is to get conservation on the ground, my goal is to get conservation on the ground. Let's do it. And so that's the other kind of ulterior motive of mine, is to prove that even if you have a four-letter federal agency that just wants to say no, that there are other federal agencies who are actually doing their jobs that are willing to step in and help fill that void too. So hopeful, optimistic stories all the way around. And yeah. Good.
Going a totally different direction here, kind of as we close up, but I'm curious on just from the standpoint of the general public in Iowa and what you hear, whether it's wetlands, whether it's batch and build a buffer strip, an oxbow that farmers have. What kind of interest is there from the general public from the standpoint of recreation, like the hunting recreation and stuff? Do they have a lot of people, trying to contact them saying, hey, could I walk that for pheasants?
Absolutely, they do.
Can I deer hunt that, whatever that might be? And is that a good thing, a bad thing? What is that from a public perception and pressure standpoint?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with that question as well. Iowa is like 45th or 46th in the nation for access to public land. We were 49th in the nation. I think Rhode Island was the only state with less access to public land. I thought
Texas was the worst. But.
No, they're not at all. Yeah, Iowa's it's bad. I mean, bad and good, right? I mean, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of access to public land for, say, hunting, and so that is an issue. And there are plenty of environmental leaning people, especially usually associated with cities, who have this criticism of, well, we don't want our tax dollars going towards private lands conservation. It should go towards public lands conservation. And there's that whole debate, which we won't get into. And again, this is why earlier I said, look, I just focus on two things: preventing soil loss, cleaning water, and that's it. Because you can really get lost in the weeds, pun intended, when you start diving into the sort of social justice aspect of whatever, right? So I respect that argument. I don't agree with it, but I respect it. Okay, we could dive into it, but I don't. Instead, what I encourage people to do is talk to the people who own the land that you want to hunt. Believe it or not, if you go and knock on someone's door and say, hey, how about, $25 a gun? We'd like to push this filter strip that you have, shoot some pheasants. They'll probably say yes. I can't tell you how many farmers I've offered to give them a case of beer or, a bottle of whiskey, or I'll bring them one of the birds that I shoot. And I hear yes a lot. My husband, same thing. We hear yes a lot. You'll hear no every now and then, that's whatever. But a lot of folks are asking landowners and farmers if they can push a filter strip or push a riparian area. The cool thing that I've seen is some landowners that I helped early on when I was at Heartland, like 3 or 4 years ago, put in some wetland projects. They've actually started offering hunting leases on those wetland acres.
That's really where I was going, wondering if they're making money off of it.
Yes. Yeah. And so again, those landowners have since told me, like, oh, this is really cool. I I get $5,000 a year for that hunting lease on that pond that we put in, and that's so great because it helps cover the taxes, the land taxes on those acres. So I'm excited to see that. I'm like, this is fantastic. More landowners need to see that if you put this thing in, not only is it a cool space for your family to enjoy for futures to come, but also you can get some income from it, just like hunting, you know. So I'm excited about that for what it is. And as somebody who loves to hunt, and with the minimal access that we have to public land, I am okay with offering, with talking to somebody and offering them a little bit of compensation to hunt their land. Like, I'm okay with that. So I'm all about it. I'm all about business ventures. So, mercenary me, I'm like, hey, it's good hustle, good side hustle. I'll give you some money. I'll bring you some whiskey. I'll give you a bird if I shoot one, And ends up becoming friends with these people. There's a couple landowners that I've hunted their land every year, and we've become really good friends with the people that own that land now. Yeah. So we bring them a pheasant because we want to bring them a pheasant, and then we chat about it, and they share bear meat with us when they go bear hunting, and it's just super cool that you end up building those kinds of relationships. I'll stop gushing about that now.
I'll give our Iowa listeners a pro tip on that. If you have a respectful 12-year-old son, it works. It works 100%. Every time. So
100%. Take the hat off, put him on a leg. Yeah.
And not only that, I used to do that a lot, and with my son, and it taught him how to go shake people's hands and look them in the eye and talk to them. So it was a win-win-win all the way around. So, Ruth, thanks a lot for being here today. It's fun again to visit on the water table, and I know I counted 3, maybe 4 times that you said that's a topic for another show. So, I don't think this will be the last. No. And we'll do it again. And there's a lot of topics with, that flow into conservation and agriculture. And just like we just talked about with public perception of the ability to use that land. And, we could go to private property rights. We can go lots of different directions, and we probably should, because it's good topics, and it's one of the reasons why we wanted to start the water table in the beginning was to be able to connect to our city cousins and tell them what we do and educate them on what we do so that they know it's really good stuff, and try to have them get behind it. So.
Yeah. Okay. Quick plug for your show. On the drive up here, I was catching up on some of the episodes that I've missed in the last few weeks, and you had an episode where Trey was interviewing a lady from Ontario, Mel something. Her last name is something I can't pronounce, but it's like Mel Luy something or other, and she works for the Ontario Land Improvement, Land Improvement contract. Okay. And she said something at the end of her interview with you that I loved and made me cheer as I was driving, because I was like, yes, yes, yes. And she said, this is all very nuanced. And it's so easy for city folk and environmentalists and farm advocates to just get on their side, and they're not willing to stand in this awkward middle and have these kinds of conversations. Your podcast has done such a fantastic job of bringing people on who can acknowledge the good, the bad, the ugly, the uncomfortable in this space in a very positive, constructive way. She was fantastic. And, I just, as listening to her, I was like, yes, it is nuanced. This whole subject of drainage management and everything, it's all so nuanced. But if we don't have these conversations, we don't make progress forward. So when I heard that, I thought, cheers for Water Table, bringing some people on who make that exact point, because it is. So anyway, you guys are like, you're edgy without even knowing that you're being edgy.
No, thank you. I mean, our goal is to educate.
That's fantastic.
And to know that not everything we do is there's 2 sides to every story, but there usually is some common ground if we can talk through some things.
The truth lies in the middle on almost all things.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.